Hello and welcome to my book review for Wasteland Woes, the first book in the Fallout family series by Cooke-Khan. This is a dystopic middle grade novella about two young siblings and their dog all trying to survive in the wasteland together. I received this as an ARC in exchange for an honest review, which I'm giving you now, and I'm very happy to say that it is a positive honest review because I really enjoyed this book and gave it 4 stars. The main characters of this book are James, who's a young teenage boy, his younger sister Piper, and a dog they meet while they're surviving together in the wasteland. A lot of this book is told from the dog's perspective. You do hop around in the character's head a fair bit, but the majority of the book is the dog's story and the dog's experiences with these two kids and the way that the dog perceives the world, which ordinarily is not something I'm particularly fond of because I do avoid animal-focused books and animal perspective books, especially when it's something that's, dystopic, surviving in a wasteland together. I don't want to read about sad animals, but I do think it was done really well here and I did enjoy it. It's still not my favorite thing, but I do think if you are a fan of that kind of thing, I think it was really well done here. It added a really sweet perspective to the story that I think would have been lost if you hadn't spent most of the book inside of the dog's head. And it was just really lovely because the dog does have this just unerring sense of loyalty and compassion towards basically everyone. And I think that's something that wouldn't have worked quite so well from a human's perspective. Even, the 6-year-old girl, I think she was 6, Piper, she has great loyalty and love and compassion for everyone, but I do think it being from the dog's perspective added something very important to this story that was very necessary to the way it was told. I really loved the relationships between all these characters. At the end of the day, I don't want to say this was a good vibes story because they went on adventures, and this is the first book in the series, so it opened up for a lot more to happen in the future and more important things within the context of the entire world. But I do think this was a book that was meant to make you feel good. It's about loyalty and family and, found family and the aspect of the dog that becomes very much a part of their little family. And all of the characters are wonderful. All of their personalities are so well developed, and it was very enjoyable for them. If you like middle grade books that are incredibly sweet about family and about just surviving together and relying on each other to survive, I think this was a wonderful example of that. And it was one of those books that was just heartwarming to read. It made me feel good. It was good vibes, but also had a very serious sense of gravitas about it because, they are at risk of death all the time and they are coming across people who want to do them harm. But it was, in a lot of ways, a feel-good story. I also really enjoyed the adventure elements to this book. Essentially, a lot of this book is following James, who's going out scavenging, looking for things that they can use. They live in this post-apocalyptic wasteland, as the title suggests, and he goes into abandoned buildings, he hunts, he looks for things that they can use to feed themselves or books to read. And as he's going across this, he runs into a group of bandits who don't necessarily have their best interests at heart, and he also loses his prosthetic leg, and they have to go track that down because that is one of those things that in an apocalyptic world is irreplaceable. And I think the element of having an amputee main character in a survivalist apocalyptic novel like this was really well done, and I did really appreciate that element. My biggest issue in this book was some of the writing. It did kind of feel like this book just needed one more pass of line edits because there were a fair number of issues with things like tense switching, especially in the beginning of the book. There was a lot of switching between past tense and present tense and kind of just jumping between them in a very awkward way that I found jarring. There were also a number of fragments that, again, I found very jarring. Fragments can be included in books, in writing, in a very good way. They can be useful, but in this book, it was awkward, and I did feel like some of the fragmented sentences kind of impeded the flow of the story. Again, this was largely in the beginning of the book, I did feel like that eased up throughout, and I think that might have been because the author might have gotten into the swing of things with the writing, because sometimes at the beginning you're just trying too hard and it just needed a little bit more smoothing out. So I do think if you start reading this and you're having some of those issues in the beginning, keep going, because like it is worth it. It does get better. And that's something that I would expect to see better in like later books in the series as well. The other thing with the writing that I noticed that is kind of a nitpicky thing that I wouldn't ordinarily say, but like I did really notice it a lot. There are a lot of gerunds, ing verbs, and again, heavily in the beginning, like the first like 20 pages of the book, just like it felt like there were a couple in every sentence, and it was to the point where like I started really noticing it, and like that's not something that like I would necessarily pick up on quite as much as I did here, but I did, and it just, I don't know, it didn't flow as well. And again, later on in the book, it got so much better. So like, that's why this didn't knock it down even further for me. It was just like, I didn't love it, but it kind of eased up, and I don't know. It was like kind of nitpicky things, but also like, I would expect other readers to kind of be bothered by that. But again, if you pick this up and start reading it and you're noticing that, definitely keep going, because like, it starts flowing so much better later on. I do also want to add, this is a very short book. It's only 68 pages long, so it is very much in the novella, almost short story range. And I thought that might be a problem, because I have had a problem with self-published books before where like they kind of just stop in the middle of the story to get you to keep reading, but it worked so well here. This is honestly the perfect length for this book. So if you're looking for like a middle grade like short story essentially to read, this was wonderful. Like it was just the perfect length for the story that he was telling, and this is just the first book in this, I assume, is going to be kind of a lengthy series, and it does a really good job of opening up the world to a lot more and hinting at what's more to come, because the story in this book is kind of closed. Like you get that closure in the end, like you follow them on a nice arc and you get to the end, and it's like you could view this as a complete story, but there are just so many hints throughout this and suggestions at like what's more to come, and like overarching like themes and like plots for the world that again were just kind of hinted at. Like there's some magic in this book that's kind of just like ever so briefly brought up, but is kind of heavily implied that they're going to get more into that later on. It was really, really enjoyable, and it did a really good job of making me interested in reading the rest of the series. Like I can't guarantee 100% that I will notice, because I am terrible at keeping up with new releases, but I would really like to continue on with this series because it had a lot of potential for just like more, and this was a really wonderful, really fun story with some great characters. I have a lot of questions about what else is to come, and to be honest, I just would like to see those answered in later books. So I would overall highly recommend that you pick this up if you like middle grade, if you like middle grade dystopic short stories. It was a really wonderful one. It's definitely worth like the hour that it takes to read it. I feel like it's such a short time and such a small commitment that there's not really a great reason not to pick up this book. And also today is the publication day, July 19th, so go take a look at this book. I will link it down below in case you're interested. But it was a really wonderful read, and I'm glad that I got the opportunity to read it. Let me know down below if you're interested in reading Wasteland Woes and if you think you might pick it up. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.